I was born into a house where silence carried weight and love arrived in careful doses. Our home stood at the edge of Alderwood Lane, an old colonial with creaking stairs and a garden my father tended like a second child. My name is Amelia Harper, the younger daughter of Jonathan Harper, a man whose integrity was as rigid as the oak trees lining our driveway. My sister, Victoria Harper, was 4 years older than me, and from the beginning, we were measured against each other as if life were a ledger and affection a currency. My father believed in fairness with a near religious devotion. He had built his fortune slowly, brick by brick, beginning with a modest real estate venture that grew into Harper and Cobbers, a respected regional firm. He taught us that wealth was not merely money, but responsibility toward family, employees, and community. My mother, Eleanor, was the softer presence, a pianist who filled the evenings with Chopin and quiet resilience. When I was 17, she died suddenly of a stroke, and the house learned a new language: grief. Victoria reacted to our mother's death by hardening. She returned from college with sharper edges, ambition coiled tightly around her words. I, on the other hand, leaned inward. I found solace in books, in helping my father with the garden, in the steady kindness of ordinary days. If Victoria wanted the world, I wanted peace. It would be easy to say that the seeds of betrayal were planted early, but that would be unfair. For years, we functioned like a family, albeit a fractured one. Victoria joined Harper and Coburn after finishing her MBA, quickly asserting herself in meetings. My father was proud. He admired her fire. I pursued architecture, eventually starting my own small practice. Our lives ran parallel, rarely intersecting except at holidays and birthdays. Then I met Daniel Moore. Daniel was an urban planner with a thoughtful gaze and a laugh that arrived unannounced. We met at a community redevelopment forum, arguing, politely, about the ethics of gentrification. He listened in a way that made people feel visible. When he proposed 2 years later beneath the maple tree in my father's garden, I felt something inside me finally settle. Victoria congratulated us with a tight smile. At the time, I didn't notice the calculation behind her eyes. After my wedding, my father grew ill. It was nothing dramatic at first. Fatigue, breathlessness, but it progressed quickly. Within a year, he was diagnosed with advanced pulmonary fibrosis. He handled the news with stoic grace, putting his affairs in order with a calm that frightened me. He insisted on living at home, refusing to let illness rob him of dignity. It was during those months that the subtle shifts began. Victoria took control of more operations at Harper & Co., often speaking for my father even when he was present. She began scheduling meetings without informing me, framing decisions as urgent necessities. I trusted her. After all, she was family, and she had always been closer to the business. One evening, as I helped my father settle into his armchair, he asked me to bring him the leather-bound folder from his study. Inside were documents, wills, property deeds, trusts. He looked at me for a long time before speaking. "Amelia," he said quietly, "I want you to understand what I've done and why." He explained that he had divided his estate carefully. Harper & Co. would be overseen by a trust with Victoria as managing director, but ownership would be shared equally between us. The family home, the garden, and several properties would pass to me, while Victoria would receive liquid assets and investments of equal value. "It's not about favoritism," he said. "It's about fit." I nodded, though my stomach tightened. I had never asked for inheritance details, never imagined they could become a battleground. My father made me promise something that night, that I would stand firm if challenged. "Fairness invites resistance," he said, "especially from those who confuse power with entitlement." I didn't fully understand then. My father died on a quiet morning in October. The garden was aflame with autumn leaves. The house felt suddenly hollow, like a shell after the tide retreats. We buried him beside my mother under a stone etched simply with their names. Grief has a way of sharpening truths. Within weeks, Victoria requested a family meeting, just the two of us and her attorney. Daniel sat beside me, his presence steadying. Victoria arrived in a tailored suit, legal documents neatly stacked, confidence radiating from her like perfume. She spoke of administrative efficiency and legacy protection, proposing revisions to the estate plan. Her tone suggested inevitability. I listened, heart pounding, as she laid out a strategy that would effectively transfer the family home and several properties into Harper and Kotzow's control under her management. She framed it as a business necessity, a way to honor father's vision. When I declined, politely but firmly, the air changed. Her smile vanished. "You're being emotional," she said. "Father would have wanted what's best for the company." "What's best for the company," I replied, "is not the same as what's right." That was the moment I realized this was not a misunderstanding. It was a plan. Over the following months, Victoria escalated. Documents appeared with altered language. Meetings were held without my knowledge. She questioned my competence, hinted that Daniel was influencing me. Each move was subtle, plausible, designed to wear me down. But she underestimated two things: my father's foresight and my own resolve. Late one night, sorting through my father's papers, I found a sealed letter addressed to me. Inside was a memorandum detailing contingency measures, legal safeguards, witnesses, and a secondary executor appointed should disputes arise. At the bottom, in my father's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "Trust truth, stand your ground." I folded the letter carefully, a calm settling over me. The collapse of my sister's plan had already begun. Grief does not end with a funeral. It lingers in paperwork, in unanswered questions, in the way a house sounds different at night. After my father's death, Alderwood Lane became a place of echoes. Every decision, what to keep, what to sell, what to protect, felt heavier because it carried his absence. Victoria understood this. She knew grief made people tired, uncertain, eager for simplicity, and she used that knowledge with surgical precision. The first letter arrived in November, embossed with the insignia of Harper and Kobas. It was addressed to me formally, Mrs. Amelia Harper Moore, as though I were already a stranger. The contents were polite, professional, and deeply unsettling. It outlined operational concerns regarding the properties assigned to me and suggested that, for efficiency, management authority be temporarily transferred to the company. Temporarily, Daniel read it twice, his jaw tightening. "This isn't about efficiency," he said. "It's about control." I wanted to believe otherwise. I wanted to believe my sister was simply overwhelmed, doing what she thought best. But the language of the letter was unmistakably strategic. It framed my assets as liabilities, my autonomy as risk. I declined in writing, citing the trust documents and my father's expressed wishes. Victoria responded within hours. She called me that evening, her voice smooth but strained. "You're making this difficult," she said. "We should be united right now." "Unity doesn't require surrender," I replied. There was a pause, a rare silence from my sister. "You've changed," she said finally. "No," I answered. "I've learned." From that moment on, the war became quiet but relentless. Emails multiplied. Consultants were hired without my consent. I discovered that maintenance fees on my properties were being inflated. Invoices routed through Harper & Co. to create the illusion of dependency. When I confronted Victoria, she brushed it off as administrative error. "You don't understand the scale of these operations," she said, as if scale justified deception. What hurt most was not the tactics, but the rewriting of history. Victoria began invoking our father's name in every argument, selectively quoting conversations I was not present for. She painted herself as a devoted daughter who had sacrificed everything for the family business, and me as the indulgent younger sister who had walked away. I began to doubt myself. It was during this period that Daniel became my anchor. He attended every meeting, took meticulous notes, and reminded me, gently but persistently, that integrity did not require apology. When my resolve wavered, he reminded me of my father's letter, of the trust he had placed in me. "Your strength doesn't have to look like hers," Daniel said one night as we sat in the garden, winter pressing in around us. "It just has to hold." Still, the pressure mounted. In January, Victoria escalated from persuasion to intimidation. Her attorney filed a petition questioning my capacity to manage inherited real estate, citing my career shift and recent bereavement as destabilizing factors. It was a calculated move, humiliating, invasive, and designed to force negotiation. I remember reading the petition at the kitchen table, my hands trembling. The implication was clear. If I resisted, she would attempt to have my authority legally diminished. I felt something harden inside me. The next morning, I contacted the secondary executor named in my father's memorandum, Margaret Ellis, a retired judge known for her uncompromising ethics. She listened without interruption as I explained the situation, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she nodded once. "Your father anticipated this," she said, "and he prepared." Margaret revealed details I had not yet seen, recorded statements, notarized letters, and a clause that triggered independent oversight in the event of intra-family disputes. The clause had been dormant, waiting for exactly this kind of challenge. Activating it would mean transparency, audits, scrutiny. It would also mean war becoming public. I hesitated for only a moment. "Do it," I said. The response was swift. Within weeks, Harper & Co. was under review. Financial records were requested. Decision-making authority was temporarily frozen pending investigation. Victoria was furious. She confronted me in person for the first time since the petition was filed, storming into the family home without warning. Her composure cracked, anger flashing across her face. "You think you've won?" she demanded. "You've embarrassed us." "I didn't do this," I said quietly. "You did." She laughed, sharp and humorless. "You always hid behind father's approval. Now you're hiding behind his paperwork." I met her gaze, steady. "No, I'm standing where he asked me to stand." For a moment, I saw something else in her eyes. Not rage, but fear. Because plans built on manipulation cannot survive daylight. The investigation unearthed inconsistencies, conflicts of interest, undisclosed transfers, decisions made without proper consent. Nothing illegal yet, but enough to weaken her position. And then came the call that changed everything. A former accountant from Harper & Co. recently dismissed, contacted Margaret Ellis with information. He claimed that certain documents presented during the initial inheritance meeting had been altered, subtly, deliberately. If proven, it would not just collapse Victoria's plan. It would expose it. As I hung up the phone, a strange calm washed over me. The quiet war was no longer quiet. The truth was moving, and it was moving fast. I looked around the house, my house, and felt my father's presence not as loss, but as guidance. The moment of collapse was approaching. Truth rarely announces itself with drama. More often, it arrives quietly, armed with facts and patience. But when it does arrive, it changes the shape of everything. The accountant's name was Samuel Reed. He had worked for Harper & Co. for nearly 12 years before being dismissed under what Victoria described as organizational restructuring. Margaret Ellis described it more accurately: retaliation. Samuel agreed to meet only after assurances of protection. We gathered in Margaret's office, a space that smelled faintly of old books and resolve. Daniel sat beside me, his hand resting lightly on mine. Victoria was not present, but her influence filled the room like a shadow. Samuel placed a flash drive on the table. "These are copies," he said quietly. "Originals were altered, but not carefully enough." What followed was methodical and devastating. Samuel explained that, in the weeks after our father's death, Victoria had instructed the accounting department to prepare revised summaries of the estate documents, summaries that emphasized managerial necessity while omitting critical ownership clauses. The changes were small enough to appear clerical, but strategic enough to support her narrative. "She needed you to agree voluntarily," Samuel said. "Litigation was a last resort." Margaret's expression hardened. "And when Miss Harper didn't?" Samuel swallowed. She prepared for court. The flash drive contained metadata, timestamps, revision histories, internal emails, evidence that could not be explained away as misunderstanding. Margaret leaned back, exhaling slowly. "This moves us from dispute to misconduct." Legal proceedings began within days. Victoria was formally notified that an evidentiary hearing would be held to determine whether fiduciary duties had been breached. Harper & Co.'s board convened an emergency session. For the first time since my father's illness, Victoria was not in control of the room. The hearing took place in a wood-paneled courtroom that felt both intimidating and sacred. I had never imagined our family history would be dissected under fluorescent lights, reduced to exhibits and sworn testimony. Victoria arrived flanked by her legal team, composed as ever. When she saw me, her lips curved into something resembling a smile. I wondered if she still believed she could win. Margaret Ellis presided as special master, an authority my father had deliberately arranged. Her presence alone shifted the balance. She was respected, feared, and incorruptible. The proceedings were meticulous. Victoria's counsel argued intent that any document revisions were administrative clarifications, not deceptions. That urgency justified decisiveness. That grief clouded recollection. Then Samuel testified. He spoke calmly, precisely, pointing to emails and revisions projected on the screen. Dates, times, instructions bearing Victoria's unmistakable signature. The room grew still. When it was my turn, I felt my pulse in my ears. I spoke not of money, but of trust, of promises made and broken, of a father who believed preparation was an act of love. I never wanted more than what was fair, I said. I wanted what was right. Victoria did not look at me. The final witness was unexpected. Margaret called Daniel. He testified not as my husband, but as a professional observer, detailing meetings he had attended, discrepancies he had documented, pressure tactics he had witnessed. His voice was steady, unflinching. When Victoria took the stand, the mask finally slipped. She spoke of sacrifice, of responsibility, of being burdened with carrying a legacy alone. Her voice trembled, not with remorse, but with indignation. I did what had to be done, she said. She wouldn't have survived the complexity. Margaret's gaze was piercing. You altered legal summaries to force compliance. Victoria hesitated. In that hesitation, everything collapsed. The ruling was delivered 2 weeks later. Victoria was found to have breached her fiduciary duty. All altered documents were invalidated. Management authority at Harper & Coers was suspended pending board restructuring. A forensic audit was ordered and oversight installed. But the most powerful consequence was not legal. It was final. The inheritance stood exactly as my father intended. Victoria did not appeal. When the courtroom emptied, she passed me without a word. For a moment, I felt only sadness, not victory. The cost of her ambition was not just failure, but family. Outside, Daniel wrapped his arm around me. You held, he said softly. And I realized he was right. The truth had not shouted. It had endured. The collapse of my sister's plan did not arrive with celebration. There were no raised voices, no dramatic confessions, no victorious applause. It arrived instead as silence, the kind that settles after a storm when the air feels different and you know something irreversible has passed. Victoria moved out of the city within a month of the ruling. She resigned from Harper & Co. quietly, citing personal reasons. The board accepted without comment. An interim management team was installed, and the company began the slow, necessary work of rebuilding trust, internally and publicly. Clients stayed, employees stayed. The legacy my father built endured, not because it was protected by power, but because it was anchored in principle. Victoria and I did not speak during that time. I learned through others that she had taken a consulting role overseas. That distance felt intentional. Perhaps it was easier for her to leave than to face what she had lost. Not just authority or ambition, but the illusion that control could substitute for love. For a while, I grieved her too. Not the woman she had become, but the sister I once believed I had. The one who shared secrets under blankets, who held my hand at our mother's funeral, who promised we would always look out for each other. Some betrayals do not just break trust, they rewrite memory. Daniel and I returned our focus to Alderwood Lane. The house had waited patiently through illness, death, and dispute. We restored it gently, preserving my father's study exactly as it was. The garden bloomed again in spring, stubborn and generous. I often worked there in the early mornings, dirt under my nails, feeling closer to my parents than I ever had during the chaos of inheritance meetings. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the maple tree where Daniel had proposed, I found another envelope tucked behind a bookshelf I had overlooked. It was addressed simply to my daughters. Inside was a letter my father had written months before his death. He wrote about love, not the easy kind, but the kind that demands courage. He acknowledged our differences, our strengths, our fractures. He admitted his fear that money might become the thing that divided us. If you are reading this together, he wrote, then I was wrong and I am grateful. If you are reading this apart, then I hope time will soften what pride could not. He ended with a line that stayed with me long after I folded the paper. Inheritance is not what you receive. It is what you choose to carry forward. I never sent the letter to Victoria. Some things must wait for their own season. Months later, I stood before the final audit report. Everything had been settled. The estate was closed. The house was fully mine. Not as a prize, but as a responsibility I now understood. Daniel squeezed my hand. Are you at peace? He asked. I considered the question carefully. Yes, I said, not because I won, but because I didn't lose myself trying to. The moment my sister's plan collapsed was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of clarity. I learned that fairness does not require force, that strength does not need volume, that standing your ground can be quiet and still unshakable. And I learned that legacies are not preserved through possession, but through integrity. Alderwood Lane still creaks at night. The garden still demands care. Harper & Co. still bears my family's name. But what I carry forward is simpler than wealth. I carry truth. I carry choice. I carry myself.